Welcome to the Zenergy podcast. I'm your host, Karan Takar. As mentioned last week, I had the pleasure of attending DC Climate Week, where I sat down with several leaders, including Francesco Maria Graziani, Climate and Energy Counsellor at the EU Delegation to the US. In this episode, we discuss the evolving Transatlantic partnership, Europe's clean energy goals, and how the EU is navigating critical minerals and supply chains amid geopolitical shifts, especially post-Russia-Ukraine. Francesco also shares insights on the EU's new energy directive and recent efforts to boost domestic raw material production. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe. Now enjoy my conversation with Francesco Maria Graziani. Welcome to the Zenergy podcast. It is a true privilege to have you on. Thank you for taking the time. As I was just mentioning pre-interview, I feel like you have such a wide breadth of experience working in European energy policy, and look forward to tackling it as efficiently as possible given our 30 minutes that we have. So to kick us off, could you just talk briefly about your journey into this work?
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, it's really a pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you for actually warming up the conversation by saying that I have extensive experience in energy sector. It's kind of true, but I come from a very peculiar background, if you may, because I'm a lawyer, and the reason why I kind of bumped into the energy sector was because I knew that a head of unit at the European Commission in Brussels was looking for a lawyer with a completely fresh look on energy matters, i.e., never been involved in advance in energy matters, so that I could have, let's say, a different view over energy issues and especially renewable energy development in Europe. So I basically landed around 12 years ago into the renewables unit in the European Commission. And from there, it became a big passion for me, and not only something paying the bill in a way. So from there, it was all about drafting the new renewables directive, and then after 5 years in that unit, I moved to the Director General's office, the Director General for Energy, European Commission, and there I was policy assistant for the Director General.
So you're mentioning this Renewable Energy Directive that you helped shape during the first 5 years prior to working for the Director General. Could you provide some insight into what that directive was? Because I think it will provide helpful context as we move into more current developments.
Absolutely. No, thank you for your question. It's actually very timely that we talk about it, because it all started there, right? So we already had in Europe a first directive on renewable energy, so how to increase development and uptake of renewable energy throughout the energy system. But we were at a very important junction whereby we had mandates at national level. So for each member state, they had, let's say, a specific target to hit back in the day in 2020. But we needed to, let's say, increase more the level across the energy system in Europe. And it was the time when some member states really had a lot of efforts already made, while others were lagging a bit behind. So let's say there was the idea to rethink a bit the system. Rethinking the system in a way that we would hit, let's say, a more Europe-based target for 2030. So we need to have a very strong, let's say, political support, not only from the member states, but also from all the European institutions to get together and really share the burden and the privilege also of embarking into this journey towards increasing renewable energy in our system. And if you allow me for a final sentence on this, it's for Europe is really, and probably we get into our more substantial part of for Europe is really crucial to have and a very significant uptake of renewable energy across our system, because we are not a so-called geographically rich territory or area. Therefore, we don't have hydrocarbons in our soil, so we really need to develop our endogenous sources of energy. And this is obviously renewable energy for us.
It makes a lot of sense, which actually leads nicely into my next question, which has to do with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which of course has had significant impact on the energy systems in Europe. As I was doing some research for this conversation, a stat that stuck out to me was prior to the conflict, Europe was importing around 45% of its natural gas from Russia. And of course, after the conflict, that's declined significantly, which then has had pretty significant impacts in terms of raising energy prices across Europe. So would love to hear how the energy approach has sort of shifted in Europe since the onset of the conflict.
This is the $1 million question, really. We were at around 45-46% of Russian molecules in our system. We are now down towards like 11-12%. So if you consider the time span for that, so not only how rapid the decline was, but how long it took for Europe to get to 45% before the war. So, I mean, it took like 30, 40 years to get to 45%, and it took 3 years, not even three, well, around 3 years to get from 45% to 12%. So if you can imagine like the magnitude, the scale of the effort is something unprecedented. That required an immense unity between member states, and especially between member states and the European institutions, to really shepherd this process in a way that we didn't even have one day without heating, for example, in our households, or without heating reaching our industry. So it's really like a massive effort that underwent. The problem here was really that the traditional concept of energy security in Europe saw the flows between East and West as, let's say, the main directory, let's say, for energy security, right? So relatively cheap Russian gas that turned out to be extremely expensive in a way.
From a security standpoint.
From a security standpoint, and also financially, because at a certain point, let's say, the moment Russia weaponized energy, that energy that was very cheap for 30, 40 years immediately became very expensive, also from a defense standpoint, from scrambling to find like new sources standpoint in a very few months and so on. So let's say we can see, let's say, the diversification away from Russian fuels started in 2022 as a sort of like insurance policy that also like will save us like not only like sleepless nights in the future, but also like some bucks.
Yeah, longer term,
Absolutely.
It will ultimately lead to savings as a result of not having to be like pretty reliant on Russia. So can you walk us through some of the different supply sources that have helped to fill in that gap, and how those supply sources compare economically in terms of the pricing to the Russian inflow prior to the conflict, just to get a sense of like where Europe is now in terms of its energy state, and then I'd like to get your sense of where it is aiming to go.
Sure. So right now we've let's say mobilized all the good energy in a way that, and I'm not referring to energy sources, but like human source energy sources that we had in the continent, and we really put together all the bright minds in the continent to find solutions to have like long-term viable sources to really bank on our energy security. So. Right now, like Norway, talking about gas, Norway is our main supplier, followed by the United States. So in this context, the United States and its LNG was crucial in really replacing, in certain cases, one-to-one Russian molecules that had, let's say, left our system. And this continued to be the case, and we forecast that it will continue to be the case also in the future, while we keep pushing on more renewables in our system. We, of course, see a role, an incredibly important role for nuclear in our system. We did our homeworks already back in the day at the beginning of the first von der Leyen Commission when we adopted the climate law that sees the European Union as the first continent to get to net zero in 2050. So we enshrined that in law. And while we were enshrining that in law, we did our homeworks to understand through our impact assessment how the energy mix of the future will look like, not only in 2050, but also like getting to 2050. Mm-hmm. So of course we see like still a role of gas, a declining role of gas, but ultimately it will be mostly about like renewable, some part of nuclear, and gas for a small part that cannot be covered by renewables in nuclear. Yeah.
I see. So it seems for me that a lot of this shift towards renewables over the long term partly has to do with making sure that the resources are developed domestically in the European continent as opposed to relying on an external partner. Is that a key factor in this decision making, or is it the economics? Or is it the climate aspect? Or is it a combination of the three? And if so, like how would you weight those three factors?
Well, since we are at the Climate Week, I would say that, of course, the climate aspect of it is a very important part of the equation. We are here because right now the EU emits around 6% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, but we want to be leaders in the climate space, and we want to be keeping our role as front runners in clean tech, for example, where European companies are already extremely advanced and can really teach away and be there, conquer markets, and offer clean tech solutions. Of course, the energy security part is more and more important and will continue to have a very crucial role in our regulatory system, and also in our relationships with partners around the world. So I'm the Energy and Climate Counsellor here at the EU delegation to the US. So I can talk about the bilateral relationship between the EU and the US, which is of course an incredibly important relationship because we are still the transatlantic trade flows are still the biggest flows in the world as we speak. So we should really bank on this transatlantic marketplace and actually explore any possible synergies and complementarities between the two systems so that we move together away from fossil fuels and towards a cleaner tech and cleaner energy systems. Of course, as you know, it always depends a bit on the political cycles. It depends on the personal willingness to engage and so on. But I still see a lot of good energy being put from both sides in finding solutions that actually create also a market whereby supply chains are healthy, supply chains are strengthened, supply chains are reliable, and supply chains do not have to rely extensively on one single supplier.
So on this point of the Transatlantic partnership, where are you finding alignment to be the strongest right now? And what are the friction points that risk slowing real cooperation as it pertains to energy?
Yeah, I see a very strong alignment in the clarity of the direction of travel that we have to develop a transatlantic genuine marketplace for critical materials that somehow takes into account that right now both sides of the Atlantic live under a very strict dependence from China and its processing and transforming industry. So you actually mentioned beforehand the dependence that Europe had from Russian gas. Yeah. That was 45, 46%. Okay, for certain critical materials that power our life, like everyday's life, we are at 100% dependence from China. So that clearly has to be rebalanced. So the European Union and the United States have done a lot already to not only focus the problem, but also tackling it. In the European, I can talk for the European Union, we are really committed through our Critical Raw Material Act to create this healthier supply chains around the world, and then being able to not only receive the extracted raw materials into Europe already processed, but actually building up a more processing industry at home. So we have targets to get there up in 2030, 2035, and let's say I see a lot of synergies with the US, because this is really something that could be a part of a positive agenda towards the current administration, because we have the same problems in a way, and we have so much technology to be able to find also the right solutions together.
Makes
but
sense.
We have to talk about that, and we are doing so.
Makes sense. So 2 questions regarding this partnership. One focused specifically on critical materials. So on the processing, building up the refining and processing capacity in Europe. What do you foresee as the biggest challenges? Is it a technology issue, financing issue? What has led to the European Union, as well as the US, as well as the world really, to having to now rely on China? Would love to hear your perspective on what has led to us being in this position. And then I'll save my next question, because I know there's a lot there.
Well, it's always a bit easier to come afterwards and saying, you did something wrong in the past. Yep. Clearly, something was happening. Of course, you should have done differently. Yes, it's true. We should have done things differently. We were probably too complacent in, let's say, seeing in front of our very eyes that some parts of our economy were basically outsourced entirely to China and Asia in general. It was part also of a genuine search for cooperation among nations under WTO, and the way, let's say, the finding synergies among trading partners, so that all the strong points in each other's economies were somehow used in an efficient way. And in a way, in an ideal world, it is, because, let's say, the means of production go where they are more efficient and more used, economically efficient. The problem here, we live in a world that is completely different from the world that we've been used to in the last 40, 50 years, okay? So the geopolitical challenges and the geopolitical appreciation of risks has been shifting in the last 5 to 10 years. And now, let's say, we are back in the world where we have to consider that having a backbone of your own sourcing materials and your own processing industry at home as a domestic capacity is in a way necessary. And it's, again, a bit what I was saying about getting now diversified sources of slightly more expensive gas. It's an insurance policy for your security in the future. And I'm not just talking about energy security, but I'm talking about the well-being and the livelihoods of our societies in the future. Not just talking about the European Union, but in general, globally, we need to rethink the way the challenges are taking us. And in this context, of course, we are trying to reshore some of this capacity, processing capacity. We have the technology to do so. We have now the political willingness to do so. Coming to your question, why did this happen? It happened because there was probably the focus on that politically, but a bit too much complacency in terms of okay, but things are working, economy is growing, citizens are okay. So let's say it's a mix of factors. Mm-hmm. What we have to do now is to really be laser precise in understanding where the needs are, and that's what the Critical Raw Material Act in Europe tries to do. And and then actually delivering on those needs. For example, like, I don't know if you heard, but recently the European Commission adopted the list of the 47 strategic projects under the Critical Raw Material Act, so that across the continent now we have an ecosystem of projects that actually can deliver on those objectives. So
Great.
things are moving fast.
We'll link that in the show notes.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
very interesting. It seems like the risks maybe weren't as prominent back in the day, and also not focused on as much as they maybe could have been.
Yeah.
But again, easier said in retrospect than actually at the time. And then my final question regards, of course, there's a lot of tension between the US and the EU. Again, like a big geopolitical shift occurring, not only as it pertains to China, but even between allies who've been very close partners for many years now. How is that impacting some of these approaches on critical materials as well as on the LNG side? Do you find that the current just animosity, in a sense, that might be a little too aggressive of a word, but the current conflicts that we're seeing, or disagreements, maybe a better framing of it, to impact the flow of energy as well as the potential partnership as it pertains to building this refining capacity?
Sure. I mean, you stress it all. I think that there is a lot of dust out there, especially in the press, about like how the relationships are strained between the EU and the US. How we were aligned in the past, you're not anymore aligned, so on. I think there's a lot of dust out there, and what I see from my perspective, that I have the privilege to be a bit below that dust. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of willingness to engage actually from the US administration, the new administration, on projects that actually can be beneficial to both sides of the Atlantic, including on critical materials. We are partners in the MSP. We want to continue this partnership. We know that we have a perfect synergy between our two economic ecosystems. Like, I'll give you an example. For example, Europe has been extremely good at being front runner with its industry on solutions for energy efficient appliances, for example, right? So because we had very expensive electricity and energy in general across like the last 20, 30 years. Mm-hmm. So we had to be very creative in terms of like how we use efficiently our systems. The US, on the contrary, has been like a very innovative on the software side, on the AI now side, on how to make, let's say, to create a brain behind things so that they are used more efficiently as well. So we can put together our two industrial bases and make sure that, let's say, the synergies are properly used. Mm-hmm. And this happens also in the critical material space with our processing reshoring that is happening like in both sides of the Atlantic. It's all about technology at the end. It's all about like political willingness, and we have both right now. So with all due differences, and with all the dust out there, I still see and think that the US-EU partnership also on this sector will be stronger and stronger.
I wonder, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this final questions, because I know we're sort of out of time here. Given what's been happening politically, is there a risk to the U.S. that the European Union will now view the U.S. sort of as an unreliable partner? And is there conversation that now the EU cannot rely on the U.S.? And if so, is that a result of the current political climate? Is there more because they're learning lessons from their past?
I don't think that there is the feeling that the US cannot be a trusted partner anymore. I think that there is a feeling that the current political situation is challenging because we've always been, as EU, extremely open to engage in all possible topics, and we will continue to be. And we continue to see the US as the main alliance partner, and not only in trade, but in defense and in many other sectors. We share common values, so that's the foundation of all relationships that are happening between a country that is almost 250 years old. Sometimes we forget about that. So it's not about like this presidency or another presidency that can destroy everything that has been done. Plus, we are building on 80 years of peace and prosperity that, let's say, was carried forward by both sides of the Atlantic and for the benefit of the entire world. So I would be cautious in saying that right now the U.S. all of a sudden becomes like an unreliable partner.
Sense.
And from an energy and climate perspective, of course, a lot can be done. It's not easy to receive a slap as we received with the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement from the U.S. So just to give you an example, okay? But climate change is there, not because we like it or not, or because we say that it doesn't exist, or we, let's say, downplay its possible impact. So we want to be leader. We are leaders in the energy and climate space worldwide. We want to continue to be so, and we will engage with all partners that are there, and we really hope that the U.S. will soon restart this pattern.
Thank you. Yeah. So final question, looking forward, so you've worked through some of the EU's most complex energy and economic shifts over the past decade. That's why I was inspired as I was doing research on your journey. I mean, there's so much happening in this specific area in this moment of time. What gives you the most optimism about where Europe is headed, even amidst all the uncertainty?
Okay, I reply to you with some figures, okay? That's where my optimism comes from. Last year, for the first time, like more than half of our electricity EU-wide came from renewables. More than half, more than 50%. And we have to consider that we are strongly pushing on the electrification of our system. So we're not anymore at the point where electricity was somehow a very, I wouldn't say residual, but like very small part of our system, but it's an increasing part of our system and will continue to increase. We have new energy actors. Like consider, for example, like I want to mention like one member state, Greece, that has done an incredible job in pushing in completely shifting their energy system from very coal-based production of electricity to almost fully decarbonized production of electricity. And this has been done in a very, very short time frame, considering how the effort played out. So I see a lot of reasons for optimism. I see that there is a growing coalition worldwide of actors. Think of Brazil. Brazil will now host this year COP30 in Belém, and Brazil is really like a leader in the climate discussions worldwide, and we are there with them partnering to continue being leaders together and to let's say accept all other candidacies from other countries that want to be part of this journey. But let's say. We can talk for hours about this, but many good signs out there that let me think that even here in the U.S. with the subnational state, U.S. is not just a federal state. So much is coming from the subnational state, and at the EU delegation we actually have a program now to reach out to subnational entities, civil society, states, municipalities, associations, NGOs, academia. There's so much out there. This country is so big. It's so full of energy. So let's say we really want to bank on that, and we will do so.
Thank you so much for your time and for taking part in this conversation. That was touched a lot of topics, but really appreciate your insights and grateful that you participate in this podcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Thanks so much for checking out the Zenergy podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate and subscribe to the podcast. It would mean so much to me and the rest of the team. We release episodes every Thursday, so stay tuned for all new episodes featuring industry leaders building a cleaner, greener future for us all. See you next time.